These 5 pre-meds have earned over 35 interviews, and we're barely halfway into the application cycle. For reference, most pre-meds at this stage have 0 interviews. You'll see their real AMCAS applications, so you learn the secrets you can apply to your own application. Secret number 1, medical schools accept people, not papers. The number 1 misunderstanding that pre-meds have about medical school admissions is that every extracurricular needs to be relevant. And while that statement is 100% true, we don't have the same definition of relevant. We define relevant differently. Here are 2 examples from pre-meds early in the cycle that already have a full ride acceptance to Kaiser Medical School and an interview to Stanford. I want to highlight a couple parts of this description, and we'll read them together. As a child, I remember repeatedly asking my mother to describe her vision. It's a sort of game we played. She would say, imagine looking through binoculars, but they don't help you see anything far away. That's how I see. She then talks about how her mother's vision gets worse over time. Throughout my youth, I served as her caretaker alongside my father. I guided her around our home, grocery stores, assisted with reading, and ensured that she got to and from work when she lost her ability to drive. In high school, balancing my everyday role left limited time for extracurriculars and homework. I didn't let this stop me. I made time, eventually being accepted to my dream university. And in this last paragraph are her reflections of this experience. I never resented my mom's disability for how it made life harder. I embraced the lessons it taught me about perseverance, the same kind I watched her embody through coping with her condition. Her struggles and my role in them taught me that obstacles I face in life aren't dead ends. They're opportunities to show and be shown compassion. With hard work, they can be overcome. This is a fantastic example of why all of you, every part of your story is relevant to your personal and professional development, and not to shy away about some of these things that may not be medically relevant. Because of this description, we get a much better understanding of who this applicant is and how ready they are for the obstacles and difficulties of medical school and beyond. Financial instability negatively impacted my family's physical and mental health. To support my family, I commuted daily to a 2-hour round trip. And on days I went to my lab, my commute was 3 hours. And this is the most powerful paragraph for me. Hiding these parts of you is one critical mistake that tens of thousands of pre-meds make every single year. And if you want to maximize your odds of getting into schools like Kaiser, who offers full tuition scholarships, you'll need to write the best application that you can. And we at Premed Catalyst can help. If you're already finding this video helpful, imagine how helpful you'll find working with us. More information in our link in our description box below. My mother developed cardiovascular issues, struggling to breathe and often fainting before reaching the hospital. My father, with diabetic complications and blurred visions, had multiple hand surgeries, limiting his job as an auto mechanic. I scheduled, I transported, I attended their medical appointments, I managed insurance coverage, I translated, I studied their charts to understand their treatments, and I communicated their care at a level that they could understand. I also helped with my mother's business by ensuring compliance, resolving issues, and securing reimbursements. And again, the reflection here is the most important. These experiences strengthened my emotional resilience and time management skills. They allowed me to further empathize with patients, provide culturally and financially sensitive care, and advocate for equitable care. Despite missing a traditional college experience, I would make the exact same decision for my family. These are things that traditionally don't make the medical school application because most pre-meds are wondering whether or not they are relevant. But my argument is that these experiences tell me much more about you than being the volunteer director of AMSA. Again, this paints a mature pre-med who is ready for the difficulties of medical school and beyond. Your pre-med journey incorporates every major milestone in your life. Yes, your time spent as a caretaker for your mother matters. And yes, your previous career as a social worker matters. Yes, your passion for video games or farm-to-table cooking or cat sitting, they all matter. Because all of that is relevant to the person that you bring to the table. And medical schools admit people, not paper application. We admit the whole person, not just the ink on your AMCAS. The takeaway from secret number 1 is to incorporate every important personal and professional part of your life, even if they're not directly medically relevant, because they are relevant to your personal development. And that's who medical schools care about, the person, not the paper. And look, if it feels hard to figure out what parts of your life to share and what parts not to share, I get it. I played League of Legends for UCLA and coached Parks and Rec youth basketball and refereed intramural basketball at UCLA. Were those parts relevant? I didn't feel like any of those things were important to me getting a white coat, but ultimately they ended up on my application, and every medical school I interviewed at asked about every single one of those activities. Secret number 2, if you want pho, you should go to a pho shop. Even an idiot can figure out what medical schools want. Every single medical school, in fact, tells you exactly what they're looking for. For proof, look at UCLA's mission and vision here. And if you want to see 8 full medical school applications that were memorable to medical schools, check out our application database. It features applications that have been accepted to UCLA Full Ride, UCSF, UCSD, USC, and it even includes my own application that got me into UCLA Medical School. It's simple, but just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not hard to fulfill. In fact, to fulfill this mission, they need to find pre-meds who are world-class in research, community engagement, and education. The hardest part is understanding what world-class really looks like. And I'm sure you've experienced that there are levels to this. Keep watching to the end for the bonus secret, where I show you the very real weaknesses that these 5 pre-meds had that clearly didn't matter because of how excellent they are elsewhere. I remember meeting the freshman who was in a research lab by the end of their first quarter. And that was impressive until I met the freshman who published by the end of their first year. And then I met Andy, who's been doing high quality research since high school and whose stem cell research has been published in journals like Nature, all as an undergrad more than once. He ended up graduating from the Harvard MIT MD program. That's what world-class research looks like, and I wouldn't have known until I saw it with my own eyes. And in case you're just like me and cannot do research that is worthy of a Nature publication, that's also okay, because there are opportunities to be world-class in other things. Here are 2 examples for what world-class looks like for community engagement and for underserved populations. The first applicant focuses on harm reduction, and the second focuses on underserved Latino populations. This example will show you what world-class involvement looks like for harm reduction research. In the hall, I saw a wall of pictures of clients. I smiled, looking at the silly poses. Then I looked down and saw "in memory of." These were all people who had died from an overdose. I learned in class about the scope of overdose deaths, over 70,000 dead in 2017. Yet, despite the staggering number, I noticed how little discussion there was around drug use and how policy reform seemingly did nothing to help. Wanting to learn more, I applied for research, doing harm reduction community engaged research as an undergrad. Here, I started as a research assistant, recruiting participants for our study on our willingness to use fentanyl test strips. So immediately you can see that we're describing why this matters in a way with stories that are unique to that pre-med's individual experience. There's an extremely powerful moment already in the first sentence when he's seeing a bunch of silly smiling clients who passed away from overdose. Blank is the first clinical trial in the US to test the efficacy of a novel overdose education intervention using fentanyl test strips. Here are my responsibilities. As part of the study intervention, I conducted motivational interviewing sessions to encourage uptake of fentanyl test strips and other prevention methods. Expecting to discuss life-saving tips, I instead encountered something completely different. Our clients felt ambivalent about overdosing, but as I listened more, I began to understand. Overdose had become so normalized in people's lives that it had become acceptable. And I love this paragraph because world-class activities and world-class pre-meds have a different perspective than most of us because they have been in the thick of the subject that they're experts in. For example, when I read this, I did not expect so many people to be ambivalent about overdosing, for overdosing to become acceptable for these clients. My first participant, Blank, that fatally overdosed, hit me hard. Lying motionless on the kitchen floor, I tried to convince myself that I was okay. Scared, I returned to the site expecting everyone to be completely broken. But instead, I saw how the community grew closer together. Again, another world-class juxtaposition of what you expect versus what actually happened. Everyone supported one another. Seeing another picture being put up on the wall, I saw the value of community. Our clients are not just another statistic. We'll always remember their silly poses and cherish the time we had together. It becomes very obvious that this pre-med was very involved with the people and the projects. And the way you know is that these stories are so specific and these reflections really tug on your heartstrings. The only way you can get those stories and the data and this level of impact is by really being involved and responsible for independent projects. You can see that it's not easy to get this level of involvement. He put in 8,000 hours, multiple years. And while you don't have to put in multiple years, this is what it looks like to be world-class in the thing that you're interested in. Real stories, real interesting, nuanced reflections. That's what stands out here. And this is an example of an applicant who is world-class around this theme of underserved and Latinx community medicine. I don't want to draw your attention to this extracurricular, but rather the notes that I have underneath about what her application consisted of. You can see here there are 11 activities that really fall under that underserved Latino health theme. She teaches English in rural Spain. She works in a federally qualified health center. She supports a street medicine clinic. She's an actress in a Latino culture play. She developed and taught a course on incarceration. She was an RA for a Latino-themed dorm. She was an underserved high school mentor, Scholars Underserved program in California. She was the head of a scholarship committee to help underserved students get the books that they needed. She taught English to hospital custodians, and she was involved in Latinx community medicine health fairs. Again, if you're looking for what world-class looks like, you can do it in one activity with 8,000 hours and exceptional impact, like the first example we showed you, or you can have significant breadth and significant depth, multiple activities that fall under this theme and this passion of yours. Those are two definitions of what world-class looks like. The takeaway from secret number 2 is that this is what it looks like to get into top medical schools. This level of excellence is the price of admission. And if you want to pay the price, that is totally up to you. But for me, who wanted to pay the price as a UCLA pre-med freshman, I didn't know that this is what it looked like to be world class. And if you don't want to pay the price to get into these top medical schools, that's okay too. It's hard to make this level of impact, but by showing you what that looks like exactly, I'm hoping that you can make a better decision for yourself and what you want for your pre-med journey. And the craziest thing about excellence is that pre-meds who are truly world-class get away with a ton. Secret number 3, force me to care. The person reading your application may be an endocrinologist. They deal with thyroid issues, hormonal imbalances, and are diabetes specialists. And so your research in cerebral cavernous malformations or in discovering a new viral bacteriophage are really unfamiliar to them. It is your job as a writer to force the reader to care. Your writing must answer 2 questions. Why does your work matter, and how has it changed you as a person? Here are 2 examples, one great and one bad, on how to involve your reader in your writing. So here's an example of a publication in Nature, no less, that does a poor job of helping the reader care about what this activity is. I'm a co-author in our paper, which details the complex structure of rotavirus. My major contributions included modeling and improving the quality of ambiguous regions, making telling figures in movies, and editing the manuscript. This was an enlightening experience that allowed me to work with several veteran experts in the field. Through the hours of literature review, countless revisions, and late nights in the lab, I've come to affirm that diligence is required for any worthwhile project or investment. So clearly here, he doesn't really answer the question, why does this research matter and how did it change you as a person? He kind of puts in this reflection about how diligence is required for any worthwhile project or investment, but it doesn't really land because the evidence behind it, the whole rotavirus and the contributions of modeling, not only do I not really understand what that is, I don't really understand what the paper and what the project was for in the first place. So this is an example that doesn't do a great job of helping the reader understand why what you're doing matters. And I want to contrast that example with this example here. Our lab studies blank, a disease characterized by neurovascular lesions in the brain. And it affects almost 40 million people worldwide. So immediately I'm getting a sense of, oh, this seems like a big problem in the world. I noticed that the impact of these lesions on patient cognition wasn't well understood. He's creating the context here so that the reader can understand what the problem to be solved is. To address this, I designed studies investigating the relationship between blank and cognitive outcomes such as memory and coordination. And so now In 3 sentences, I understand his exact research project. There are these neurovascular lesions that affect 40 million people, and it's not clear how those lesions affect how people think and remember and coordinate. So my project was trying to figure that out. Leading a team of 4 undergrads, I connected our lab with a cognitive behavioral lab to run behavioral experiments. And in my paper, we identified critical stages during lesion development, are exploring the mechanism by which they impact cognition to develop potential targets for treatment. So that first paragraph alone already answers, why does this matter? And now the next question we want to try to get to is, how did this experience change me as a person and professional? It was my first week in the new lab, and I had yet to meet everyone or learn their roles. Through the glass of an adjacent bay, I observed the postdocs meticulously dissecting bones for a mouse for a brand new project. Harvesting multiple bones from one mouse took 45 minutes. I had developed proficiency in a similar protocol in my previous lab, and I wondered how proposing a more effective method to the postdocs would be received. Now, this is an interesting real scenario where the pre-med is an undergrad and there are older, more established postdocs, but he feels like he can do something better here. After all, I was new and far more junior compared to these seasoned postdocs, and that's a very mature and emotionally savvy observation. Despite my trepidation, I spoke up regarding a technique I had previously found successful, and to my surprise, they welcomed my advice. You can start to see he's growing from this experience. I demonstrated how to use one fluid motion to isolate the bones and guided each postdoc through the process individually. You're starting to see this storyline build out where he's becoming more welcome in the lab. And after a few days of practicing, we took it down from 45 minutes to 5 minutes per mouse. Although I initially hesitated to advise senior team members, I'm glad the lab treated me as an equal. The experience taught me that everyone has something valuable to contribute, regardless of their level of experience. Since then, I've trained 8 other students, and while I've gained more experience, I always value fresh perspectives and actively seek input from new students on how we can do things better. So this second piece does a great job of explaining how he changed as a scientist because of this experience. And the story that explains that is very clear, as opposed to our first example where there's some reflection about diligence, but it's not really clear how the description prior leads to that conclusion. This is a great example of forcing me to care by telling me exactly why it matters and telling me exactly how it changed you. Takeaway from secret number 3. It is your job to convince the reader why your work matters. Having real impact and real depth on your extracurriculars is memorable, but the reader can only appreciate it if you do a good job conveying why your impact matters. It's more than the number of hours that you're working. It's the independence, the responsibility, and the tangible results that really matter. And of course, when you don't do a good job of explaining why the reader should care, the reader doesn't care and your application gets forgotten. Secret number 4, medical schools teach medicine. Medical school admissions doesn't care for medical knowledge. This application earned a full ride scholarship. That's $400,000 to Kaiser Medical School in California. And this application has 5 interviews to schools like Mayo, UCSD, Vanderbilt, WashU, and Cornell, and earned those 5 interviews by September, when most pre-meds are still submitting their secondaries. And none of those applications focused on medical emergencies, drug names, or scrubbing into surgeries. That first application focused on teaching underserved populations and the Latinx community. The writing paints the picture of a pre-med who is humble, independent, and focused on erasing stigma. That second application focuses on small business consulting, magic shows, and basic science research. That application features a pre-med who is creative, confident, and unbelievably persistent. Takeaway from secret number 4. No medical school cares if you know what a pneumothorax is or the mechanism of action for epinephrine. Med schools know that they can teach you medicine. They've been doing that for hundreds of years. What medical schools cannot teach you are the traits of a fantastic doctor. Values like persistence, passion for your community, creativity, and confidence. And when you bring those traits to your medical school application and combine them with what medical schools can teach you in the classroom, you become one hell of a doctor. And so medical school admissions are in the business of finding the right people with the character traits that give them the highest potential of being fantastic doctors. So your application should focus on those exact traits and not medical knowledge. Secret number 5, magic tricks in pizza. I want you to close your eyes and think of the most cookie cutter pre-med that you can. That pre-med probably has a 3.85 GPA, 512 MCAT, is in a plant biology lab they found on an email newsletter, and is the volunteer director for 2 clubs that do absolutely nothing. And of course, don't forget on the weekends they were an EMT, and in their 2 gap years they were a medical assistant for a cardiology clinic. And of course, when you ask them what they do for fun, they say they hang out with friends. I can think of at least a dozen pre-meds who terrifyingly fit that description exactly. On the flip side, here are 2 examples of pre-meds who bring their personalities to their application. So excuse the pun, but this experience is magical. When I started learning magic, I found solace in practicing tricks on my ailing father. His favorite trick involved a deck of cards turning to glass in his hands. When I first performed it, his exclamations of awe briefly melted away his pain. And as I performed to larger audiences of up to 400 guests, I saw how magic created moments of wonder that offered a respite from life's challenges. Inspired by this, I stepped up as my role as president, and I started a magician volunteer program at the hospital. Along 5 magicians, I led the initiative in uplifting kids with magic. And to date, over 200 children have been captivated by magic. Already in this first description, you're seeing how magic entered his life. He does it for his ailing father, who is just looking for some sort of escape from all the pain he's experiencing. He's performing to up to 400 people. He started a program in the hospital working with kids. It's just really beautiful to see how this evolved. Each week at the hospital, chronically ill children arrived, seeking respite from their stay. There's a 12-year-old boy with Crohn's who often spent weeks cooped up in the hospital. But when his signed card disappeared and reappeared folded up inside my mouth, his eyes opened wide with amazement. Thoughts focused on the miracle he witnessed. It's just beautiful imagery, and you're starting to be a part of the story as you're reading it. The joy on his face reminded me of the positive impact a simple trick could have on his emotional well-being. These were more than illusions. They were moments of healing and connection. And I broke the magician's code. I gave him a deck of my cards, and I taught him tricks for him to pass time with. You're really just starting to appreciate the relationship that the author is building with his patients. Weeks later, the kid created and performed original tricks, filling me with indescribable joy. I felt inspired, seeing this kid focus on misdirection and illusion instead of masks, alcohol swabs, and sterile gloves. That was awesome. And he goes on to reflect how medicine goes beyond treating symptoms. It's about building trust and building rapport. And again, those reflections are only so good as the story before it. Every pre-med can write this exact same conclusion, but this is not what matters. What matters is the story and the build-up and the description prior that shows me that you really understand rapport and trust. I love this work in activities because it really just puts the author's heart right on their sleeve, and the reader gets to be a part of that magic. So these are the actual 5 applications that are applying right now and having outstanding success. And we've talked a ton about the second column, all of their strengths. You can look at their GPAs and their MCATs if you'd like, but I'd like to focus on some of their weaknesses. Applicant 1 has a bunch of research, but there's not a lot of direct patient care or shadowing. Applicant 2 doesn't have a fully cohesive personal narrative, and their clinical exposure is also a little bit on the weaker side. Applicant 3 has a great GPA, but they do have B+ in cell and molecular biology and in other prerequisites. Their application is all about community service and underserved populations, and the research that she does is pretty weak. Applicant number 4 doesn't have a perfect GPA and certainly not a perfect MCAT. In fact, many applicants have stats that are very similar to this. And applicant 5 is 3.8 GPA and received an academic warning earlier in their undergraduate years. But still, they've been able to come back, create an entire application focused on harm reduction, and now has 7 interviews before Thanksgiving. And the reason I bring these weaknesses up is that many pre-meds would see this column of weaknesses and think, oh yeah, that is going to hurt their chances significantly. But no, that's not the case, because these applicants are world-class in something, whether it's harm reduction research or Latinx underserved populations, or performing world-class research or education. When you have outstanding strengths, you get this sort of halo effect that protects against the weaknesses. And again, while these applications are not perfect at all, because they feature something that is so strong and so compelling, many medical schools, in fact 35 plus medical schools, are willing to take a chance on them. Takeaway from secret number 5. Yes, you're pre-med today and you will become a doctor tomorrow. And yes, you're a book club fanatic. And yes, you're a photographer. Bring all those identities to your medical school application because they help schools get to know you better. Bonus secret number 6, the halo effect. World-class pre-meds can do no wrong. If your application is world-class, medical school admissions will let go of some of your weaknesses. Notice that those are very real weaknesses, but still those 5 pre-meds have earned 35 plus interviews. And so those weaknesses aren't enough for medical schools not to be interested. And speaking of 35 plus interviews by October, I want to talk about the Thanksgiving rule. The Thanksgiving rule was popularized by Lizzie M., a famous AdCom on SDN who shared her personal anecdotal experience that pre-meds who don't have a single interview by Thanksgiving are likely not to get an acceptance that cycle. And again, in direct contrast, these 5 pre-meds have 35 plus interviews. At Premed Catalyst, we focus on real pre-med applicants so you can get the most up-to-date information on what medical school admissions looks like today. Where else are you going to get up-to-date applications word for you to review? The answer is nowhere. And of course, if you're interested in how these pre-meds do, stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll keep you posted on where these pre-meds got accepted to.